National Bank. First, always.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. The proud story of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion is told in the words written by Cal Boykin of College Station, a historian of the 814th. Cal Boykin was a gunner atop his M8 Armored car on recon duty in World War II's European campaign, patrolling the French roads behind Normandy, through Belgium and Holland, on to Germany. It is our honor to welcome Cal Boykin, Jr. of College Station, to Veterans of the Valley. Cal, it is an honor to have you here. You're A&M class of 1946.
1946.
You've lived here a long time. Now, you were born in Roswell, New Mexico in 1924.
Right.
And
1924, and that was 12 years after New Mexico became a state. And quite a number of years before the E.T. landed in Roswell.
You were somewhere in between those
in
two.
There, right.
You weren't in New Mexico long, actually. You grew up in Big Spring, and it was that
Right.
time when you were a youth and you were playing sports in high
Oh,
school
yeah,
that you
right.
decided that the war had broken out, and you decided that you needed some military training, and that's where Texas A&M came into it.
Right.
Sort of talk about your youth.
Well, I had never been to A&M. I had some friends. Of course, I lived on a farm at Rochelle with my grandmother for a while, and I knew some graduates or seniors with their boots and all, and I was anxious to get to A&M for that reason, in addition to being able to be ready to go into service when I was called.
Now, you grew up in Rochelle, which is near Brady, which is where Earl Rudder was a coach for a while,
Yes, he was
right?
coaching high school football while I was playing on the grammar school Rochelle team.
Right. Right. You went back to Big Spring, 16 years old. That's when you decided you want the military training, and you came to A&M in 1942. Talk about A&M in the early 40s as the war was, as the United States was just getting into the war.
Well, it was a busy place. I don't remember, there were over 7,000 students, and maybe close to 8,000, and they were getting ready to go. And what happened? The draft age was lowered to 18. I believe it was November of 42. See, I started in June of 42 on that tri-semester speeded up program. And so many decided they'd go that route, enlist in the Enlisted Reserve Corps.
Right.
Well, I decided not to do anything. I went home, checked with my draft board, and a young blonde there said, you volunteer and you get your Joyce Branch's service. And I said, well, sure, Air Corps. So I signed up, and 2 weeks later, I was gone.
And they threw you a curve, though, a little bit, right?
Pardon?
They threw you a curveball on that.
Oh,
though,
they did. But she had, I guess she had the right information, but
Right.
they turned it on her. But I was inducted in Lubbock and on up to Fort Sill.
Right.
Now, as soon as I arrived, I had a V, volunteer for the draft, next to my number, and the first sergeant said, forget it, we're going to put you where we want you. And I'll give credit to the placement officer who tried to get me out of the infantry, because I had farm experience and that was about it, sheep and goats and chopping cotton. But anyway, I finally admitted, well, I'd wash and grease cars at the Crawford Hotel at Big Spring, which my father managed. And so right away, tank destroyers. But at the same time, they found out I could type, courtesy of the high school, Big Spring. And so I was typing insurance forms there at Fort Sill for quite a while, and I thought that was going to be my permanent assignment. But all of a sudden, I moved to Camp Hood.
Right, which was what Fort Hood was called before.
That's
Fort
right,
Hood.
right.
And you were in the 814th, and obviously this
after I left Hood. Now I was at Hood quite a long time.
Right.
And Tank Destroyer Replacement Training Center. Now General A.D. Bruce, class of 16, A&M, is the one who established that, and is known as the father of Fort Hood.
I see.
So anyway, I left there, had joined the 814th on maneuvers in Louisiana.
Right, at Fort Polk.
at Fort Polk.
Right, right.
It was Camp Polk at that time.
Right. Camp Polk, that's really where the 814th was first
It was formed there
right.
in 1942. Right. And it had the Indiana National Guard as cadre, maybe some from Kentucky, I don't remember.
And then it was activated in Fort Polk, or Camp Polk, as you said.
Right.
But then it moved its headquarters to Camp Bowie, Texas.
It was there at Bowie because Camp Hood was so crowded.
Right.
They didn't have room, so they trained at Bowie for a little while at Brownwood, and then moved on to Hood.
Right. In March of '43, I believe, is when it.
Well, that was before they went on maneuvers. Really,
I see.
They went back to Polk,
Right.
Leesville, and all that area.
Yep.
Cut over timberland, cold winter.
Talk about tank destroyers and the tanks, because I know that obviously the vehicles themselves are something that means a lot to you. You have several books. You have written your own history of the 814th. Talk about the different kind of tanks that there were. It was amazing. These and you were in an M8 armored vehicle.
Right. But the tank destroyers, this was something envisioned by General Marshall, Chief of Staff. And it was developed by General McNair and implemented by General A.D. Bruce, Major General A.D. Bruce, class of A&M 16.
Right.
Don't forget. And so we went there, but he had a big hand in designing the tank destroyer. It started out with a 3/4 ton truck with a 37 millimeter mounted on the top with a thin gun shield. Well, that was useless, but anyway, they could use it in training. And then the M3, which was a half-track with a 75 millimeter gun, a half-track personnel carrier with a 75 millimeter gun, which was a step up, I'd say.
Right.
Then finally they came with the M10, which was on a medium tank chassis like the Sherman, and a little bit of different turret to it. And it mounted a 3-inch gun with 76 millimeter, and a little more powerful gun, which could do the job. Now General Bruce wasn't too happy with that one. He wanted the M18, which was a lower, lighter in weight, had a 76 millimeter gun too. But anyway, they produced both of those. But the M10 was the first real tank destroyer.
Yeah, and then the armored car.
And the armored car.
The M8.
We used that little M6 with the 37 millimeter gun and the gun seal on the 3/4 ton truck in training. When we got to England, we drew our M8s, the first I'd even seen. And it's a 55 mile an hour, 6-wheel, rubber tires going, mounting a 37 millimeter gun with a coaxially mounted 30 caliber machine gun. And some had a ring mount with a 50 caliber. My thought was you'd never get out of that thing if you got hit, because you had to get over that ring. So I wasn't too unhappy about not having a 50 caliber.
Yeah, we're going to see a photograph a little bit later on of the M8, and it's not what people normally think of as a tank when they look at the movies with the tanks that run over piles of things and all that.
Yeah.
These tires look like regular semi-tires, like 6 rubber tires, and that was for speed and maneuverability, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And their maneuver, and we were classified really as, well, see, the Tank Destroyer Battalion had 3 gun companies, 36 tank destroyers. And they had a reconnaissance company, of course, headquarters, but the reconnaissance had 3 recon platoons, and a pioneer, kind of an engineer, mine sweeper, digging around and whatnot type of a platoon. Yeah.
Right. Now, you talk about the M8. You didn't really get exposed to that weapon until you were actually in England, as I understand. But when you were there, you were a gunner on this M8 armored car with the 37 millimeter gun. But let's get you over to England. From Halifax to England aboard a reconstructed luxury liner, right?
That's
called
right,
the
Ile de France, which the British had taken over. Our crew was a British crew, a few Canadians. And there were 15,000, as I understood, troops aboard that ship when we left on Valentine's Day of February '44. And it took us 7 days, zigzagging, I suppose. Of course, rumors abounded. We'd been sunk, we'd been followed, all these sorts of things.
Right. It was crewed by the British,
Yeah.
and the food was horrible.
Yeah, oh, you bet. Had navy beans for breakfast and kidneys and I don't know what, a liver probably.
As a matter of fact, Boykin wrote this book, The History of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and I want to read what you wrote about the food.
Okay.
I'll try to be sensitive as I can on this. You said that Warren Bressler of Wakefield, Nebraska, remembers standing in line with his mess kit and a coffee cup ready for breakfast. The soldier in front of me held out his mess kit to receive his oatmeal and liver breakfast.
Yeah.
The liver was actually cooked in the oatmeal.
Yeah.
When the oatmeal hit the mess kit, it had a dead mouse in it.
Yeah.
The cook picked the mouse out of the oatmeal and liver by the tail, threw it on the floor, and said to the GI, "You don't have to eat that." He went on to say that he spent $1.75 of the money that he'd won playing poker to go out and buy a corned beef hash sandwich instead.
That was
right?
the big operation we had going, buying those sandwiches until they cut that off.
And he took his hard-earned poker money to go buy that sandwich rather than eat that oatmeal and liver. I can't say that I blame him at all.
No, that's right.
You got to England. Talk about after you got to England and what you thought that you were preparing for as far as the invasion of Normandy, and sort of take us through that time.
Well, we, of course, landed at Greenock, Scotland, immediately transported down near Birmingham. We got off at Stratford-on-Avon, although I wasn't aware that was Shakespeare's
Right.
Place. But anyway, we ended up at Packington Park, which is an estate of Lord Packington.
Right.
And things went well there. We had our equipment, all of our tank destroyers and our armored cars and trucks and jeeps and all that. And we did a little maneuvering around occasionally, but not too much.
Right.
Because we could do so much damage. We tore up the gate to the Packington Park, so we had, with an M10, we had to go and park all of those way off somewhere, which meant we had to go guard it at night. And I spent a lot of time on guard there.
Right.
At night.
Right. Right. You thought at the time that maybe your group was going to be part of the invasion itself, but
Right.
it turned out you became protectors of the men
That's right.
of the invasion.
Right.
Talk about what your duty was.
Well, after about 3 months up at around Birmingham, we moved down on the coast in Dorset, near Dorchester, and they had several marshalling areas there. And we thought, well, we would be part of the invasion. And but I would say that I was one of the youngest in my company. Most of them were up in their late 20s, early 30s, because they were mechanics and truck drivers, foreign boys. They knew machinery. They could do all these things. And I was just kind of a late comer. But anyway, all of a sudden they altered our plan, and we became service troops to the invasion force itself. And these, I'm telling you, I was 20 years old, and I felt like I was a senior to these kids.
Yeah, they were young kids, weren't
Right,
they?
they were young. And they had the spirit.
They had the morale. You talked about a young corporal in a speech that he
Right.
made.
I'll tell you if I can remember it, but we had these little tent movies. He got up on the stage, and he did it more than once. He recited Billy Rose's poem, The Unknown Soldier. And he said, the last verse says, "I am the unknown soldier, and maybe I died in vain, but if I were alive and my country called, I would do it all over again." And boy, they cheered.
Oh, I bet
and they had him do it again.
Yes. It's amazing how those snapshots in your mind will stay there.
Another thing,
Yes, sir.
they had music, and old Texas Jim Robinson was singing, "I'd love to be in Texas for the roundup in the spring." That was the other side.
I know of the 814th, there were several members that were from Texas, as a matter
Not
of
very
fact
many.
there. Yeah.
Not very many. A couple of officers,
Right.
and one or two enlisted men.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Let's go right now to some photographs that we want to show. That these are pictures, a lot from your book, which is, I guess, subtitled "Garde de Bête," which means
Beware of the beast.
beware the beast.
bet.
Talking about the tank destroyer. Let's go to some of the pictures now that we have. You can look at them right there on the monitor. Now that is a young Calvin Boykin, and also the patch of your unit. So when was that picture taken?
That was taken while I was at North Camp Hood.
Right.
And the patch, shoulder patch, is a tank destroyer.
Of the 7th Armored.
Yeah, the tank the tiger or the panther crushing the tank in its jaw.
Crushing the tank.
Now, the 7th Armored, we were attached to them after we landed in Normandy.
Right, right.
And all the way through.
You bet.
And I belonged to their association. Of course, last week I was in Holland with them.
Right, we're going to talk about that. You just got back from a trip.
Right.
Where was this picture taken?
That, by the way, was taken in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Uh-huh.
And that was when I had never received a furlough in all my service.
Right.
But there we were across the Rhine, and all of a sudden they came and wanted to know if I wanted to go to England, which I did. Well, I got up to Birmingham. My girlfriend had married, so I moved on up to Edinburgh, and that's at Sir Walter Scott Monument, right at the base. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next photograph. You are there on the left, on your sort of kneeled over.
With my mess kit as usual, you know.
Right, right, right.
And that was in Birmingham, or in Packington Park. That was early.
Right,
right.
As you were preparing to move across the English Channel. And that's members of your company there. Here's another picture. This is obviously during the winter.
Yes, at near Spa, Belgium. And it was right after the worst part of the buzz. This was in January of '45. And when I sent that picture home, they didn't realize my hand was wrapped here. I spent 4 days in the field hospital, non-combat wounds. I didn't get any Purple Heart, but it was an infection that developed. And an old Belgian farmer told me, "You better get to the doctor."
I see.
And I did, and they kept me there and drained that out every 4 hours or so.
Wow.
For a long time.
It was painful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. I think we've got, this is a book that, the cover of a book, as you can see the title, World War II, AFV's Armored Fighting Vehicles. And the reason that we're showing this is that the cover photo, as you would find out later on, is your tank. You're in that photo. It's somewhat hard to see, but you say that you're the person up in the top of the turret with the helmet sort of sticking up over the gun barrel there, and that's you. And I guess you didn't even know that this picture was taken, much less it was going to be used for the cover of this book.
No, I never. And my brother-in-law, Don DePasquale of Dickinson, he noticed it. He found this and told me, "Take a look." And I said, "My gosh, that's our crew." I recognized every one of them. Right. But that's a replacement armored car. And I was a sergeant. I made a sergeant after we lost the armored car and our crew scattered, and so I took over. Right. And so we were off on a mission somewhere.
Right, right. And you show up on the cover of a book. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And this is the cover of your book, A History of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, 1942 to 1945. And you wrote that book. Talk. It's a great cover with that emblem of the is that a panther? Is that right? Of a panther chewing up a tank.
Right. And well, I've been collecting documents because I'd go to Washington for work, some work assignments. Right. And I'd go over to Suitland, Maryland for the Federal Records Center and see what all they had. And then I had copies made of everything from the 814th. And then I got some from the 7th Armored as well. And I used those in the book, plus what I'd gotten from individual members, former members of the 814th. They sent me pictures, biographical sketches, information about training, and some action, quite a bit of action. And I used almost everything they sent. Right. And it was a pretty good sample. Now, these were Midwestern boys, now I'll tell you, most of them were.
It's a fascinating book.
They were no-nonsense boys.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to, by the way, I'll tell folks now that we're not going to tell all of Sergeant Boykin's story in this episode of Veterans of the Valley. As a matter of fact, we'll be continuing next week. So we're going to hear the whole story because it is indeed fascinating. But for the rest of the time that we have here, I want you to talk about your landing at Utah Beach. It was August the 8th of 1944, some 2 months after D-Day. Right. And talk about what you found. You had come over from Weymouth across the English Channel. And I know in your book you talked about the entire experiences from the beaches to the Baltic. Right. Talk about landing at Utah Beach and sort of your initial days in France.
Well, we came across on the LST. In fact, we loaded up and we were sitting there waiting. So we had the captain lower the thing down so we could go swimming. And we swam around the channel and came back on there. But we landed, came in at night, and you could see the hulls of some ships either had been sunk through a fire or maybe purposely to stem the tides and so on.
Right.
But anyway, you could see that. And then we rested, and when the tide went out, well, then we lowered the ramp and just drove off. And it was August the 8th, and that's the records show that. And I remember it because that was my maternal grandmother's birthday.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. And so you moved into Utah Beach, and you thought that there might be a little bit of time to sort of get settled and sort of learn what was going on, but no, you all moved out that morning, right?
That's right. And it was completely different. All we knew that, the hedgerows, and there had been a big Cobra operation and a breakthrough, and tanks were on the move. But I expected to be a broad front here with infantry and tanks and so on there, and do each
with
fire
air support and everything and all that.
But
right?
no, we single filed, and we left that next morning. And I told the lieutenant, I said, "Hell, that's where the Germans are." He said, "That's right." But we were with Patton's Third Army, and you know the story how fast they barreled through France.
Right.
And one thing I have not mentioned is the fact I was interviewed by the Army Hour at the Seine River crossing.
I see.
And by Lieutenant and I. And I like to say, well, we're the only ones that could read, because they gave us a script to read. They wouldn't let us off the cuff say anything as far as I could tell.
Right.
And we did a dry run. Of course, you could hear the mortars coming and the machine guns and so on. And but all it was how many miles a day we'd driven, how much gas we'd used, which we had no idea, and so on. And then the interviewer shook our hands like they will be the first to cross the Seine. And this will be broadcast at home Sunday night. Well, we didn't cross. We went farther south. We were not the first to cross. And I don't think it was ever aired back home. Thank goodness.
Well, that's showbiz, right?
Yeah, right.
You were attached to the 7th Armored Division, like you said, and but your particular job, your particular duty was as recon.
Right.
Talk about that. What was involved with that? Because I guess as danger goes, that was one of the more dangerous elements of this mission.
Usually you'd take the recon and they would lead the column.
Right.
Until we made contact, and we sensed something going on. Now, in one case, we had one of the gendarmes, or maybe he was a postman. Anyway, had a little cap and a uniform riding a bicycle. We said, "You ride up here about 100 yards or 200 yards, and then signal if you see anything, or don't tell us whether to come or not." And we do that, and all of a sudden he dropped down, and then here came the German column. Here I was in front. Well, I fired as quickly as I could and knocked out the lead vehicle, but it seemed like it was slow motion, trying to get things up, see the sight, and bam. And then my sergeant in the seat next to me, he couldn't wait. He reached over, hit the machine gun pedal, pow, 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 and there was a load of infantry right behind that one, and it mowed into the infantry, and of course they scattered. And then the 17th Tank Battalion behind us, they said, "Well, move over, we're coming through." And so they came through, and lo and behold, the first one got hit. Wow. Hit right up and started blazing away. Well, those Germans on that infantry truck had unhooked that anti-tank gun and just sat there and leveled it off and knocked out that light tank. Well, we rescued 2 of the crew. I don't know what happened to the other 2.
Right.
But that was just an example.
One of your duties was to sort of clean up villages that had been bypassed, I guess, in the initial assault on Normandy. Is that right?
And in that process, we were on the flanks of the main columns, and we would maybe sound the alarm in case something happened there. But we did roll into one village, and our rubber tires and so on, and the Germans were off their guns, a couple of them in the orchard talking to this French lady. They saw us and they threw up their hand. And we had taken, I think, the first prisoners our battalion took.
Is that right?
And we sent them back to the rear.
So by this time, the Germans were ready for this war to be over. They were.
Many of them were. That's right. There were some. They were diehards. I'll tell you, they were with it to the bitter end. But most of them said, "Let's get on. Let's do something else."
Right.
Yeah.
The next show, we're going to talk about more about your trek through Belgium and Holland and into Germany. We've got about a minute and a half left on this one. You're married to Rosemary. As a matter of fact, you July the 1st, I believe, you had been married 61 years. And just talk very quickly about your family. I know you have 4 children.
Right. Well, we have 4 children and 7 grandchildren.
Right, and some great-grandchildren, right?
And 4 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And so we've covered the waterfront.
Indeed.
And if you look at some of these, one of these books says, "What if?" I said, what if that anti-tank gun had been just a hair more? None of this would exist.
Exactly.
This what if.
Exactly.
And we think about those things.
You think about the generations that would not have been.
A whole generation.
Had things have gone somewhat differently.
Right.
Of course, I know that Rosemary has published herself a history of the Brazos Valley Italians.
That's
from her heritage.
And
so
she worked hard getting that state historical marker out down there at Steel Store.
Right.
And then she's written her family history from Sicily to Texas.
Right. Well, history's in your family's blood, because I know one of your daughters, Ann, works for the city of College Station, and she's been the founder of the Project Hold that is so meaningful to the city of College Station.
And she loves that history, and she remembers things I didn't know happened. But, but it's been a great time. It really has.
It really has.
And we've enjoyed it.
Thank you, and we're going to be back next week and talk for more. Cal Boykin's story is one of the many that can't be properly told in just 30 minutes, so we will continue hearing the proud story of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion next week, as well as his fascinating post-military career. We salute Cal Boykin for his service, as we salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join Cal Boykin and me next week on Veterans of the Valley.
And you were looking.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, he usually builds something in because he knows I go long sometimes. So, all right. Yeah, tell him to give you a 1 minute, because of all the ones. Of all the ones that I get, that's the most important, because that's the one where I can judge pretty much. Okay, we want to do this promo. Okay, we'll do this promo. We're just going to do a promo for that show, and you don't need to do anything but just look into that camera. Are they ready?
Ready.
Oh, okay. Not 100, 800. Here we go. Let's do it again. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to Patton's army during the Allies' final push through Europe at the end of World War II. And College Station's Cal Boykin was a gunner riding high on an M8 Armoured car, a historian, an author, a soldier. Meet Cal Boykin Jr. of College Station on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30 on KAMU TV.
That was good timing, Tom. Let's do it again at the top one more time for safety.
Okay. I can go a little slower, right? Was that a little short?
Hey, I wouldn't go any slower.
Okay, I'll go the same then. All right, here we go. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to Patton's army during the Allies' final push through Europe at the end of World War II. And College Station's Cal Boykin was a gunner riding high on an M8 Armored car, a historian, an author, a soldier. Meet Cal Boykin Jr. of College Station on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30 on KAMU TV.